You're entering Corsi Nation.
Now we've got a really special guest today, Scott Wiper, who is produced and directed and the whole film for General Flynn, Flynn the movie. And we've interviewed General Flynn. We've had a good discussion with him on the Truth Central as he was doing his tour around the country with this film. It's been highly successful. You can see it. Chris is showing you now on the screen the Flynn, the movie website. And you can see that there's many places where you can get the DVD. You can buy it on Amazon. I got it from myself on Prime. And you can watch YouTube, TV, the Apple, iTunes, Google Play, Salem Now, Fandango. And you can buy the streaming video directly from Flynn. And there's just a lot of different places where you can buy the DVD, even in Amazon, Walmart, Target, Salem Now, Epic TV. There's just it should be everywhere. And this Flynn, the movie, I'm so impressed with this, and I've watched it and just studied it. I've known General Flynn since 2016. I met him at the convention in Cleveland when Donald Trump was nominated for the presidency. And Flynn and I have been in touch on an off and on basis. Certainly when he was with the Mueller investigation, I was with the Mueller investigation. We kind of broke off contact for a while. We didn't want to be seen as kind of colluding in the background. They would, one way or the other, try to use that against us. But I've had great conversations with the general. I have tremendous respect for him. And it's a great honor, Scott, to be talking with you today about the inside of how this film came together. So why don't we start, Scott, if you can give us some of your background. I mean, how did you get into the film industry, and what is your niche, and how did you get together with the general? I guess all those are questions in my mind. You can start anywhere you want.
Start, and you can cut me off if I go too long as far as the nutshell. And thank you, Dr. Corsi, for having me on your show and for your words about the Flynn movie. I'm coming from Hollywood. I've escaped it for the last couple of years, but I went out there in the early '90s and have pretty much just made my living as an action movie director. So this is my first documentary. I have been very passionate about movies since, as soon as I got my hands on a video camera in the mid '80s, and went to film school at Wesleyan University in Connecticut, a very liberal school. But there were only so many schools in 1988 that had a film program. There was USC, NYU, and Wesleyan University. This probably around 2020, 2021, I'm also a screenwriter, so that's probably the most important skill in forming telling any 2-hour story, which is how do you translate something as massive as the General Flynn story, which encompasses the Mueller investigation and Russiagate and invasion of Afghanistan and Iraq. How do you tell it in 2 hours, right? So one thing so backtracking, so I've been making these action movies, The Cold Light of Day with Bruce Willis, Sigourney Weaver, and Henry Cavill, A Better Way to Die, The Big Ugly with Ron Perlman and Vinnie Jones and Malcolm McDowell. And I sat down to work on my next movie, and I just couldn't do it. The subplots kept getting bigger and bigger, and I was trying to work in things that mattered, like the opioid crisis, all the many subjects that you hit on. I would work in things about JFK, just random things that mattered to me. And I realized I wasn't going to be able to address it to calm my soul, just making an action thriller. And I put the word out that I just knew I wanted to do something, and be careful what you wish for. Right. And it was great. Through a series of events, I know General Flynn was looking for filmmakers and actively sitting down with them. And I got invited when it started, this particular project, and I'd driven all over the nation talking to people about what, can I do something? I didn't know if it'd be a drama or a documentary. I had no idea. But I went down in February of 2023. I did not fly when I got the invitation because I said to my fiance, she goes, why don't you, it's a 3-hour flight. I said, I have a feeling I'm not coming back. And so at that time I was in Cleveland, having left Los Angeles. So I drove 18 hours and I didn't come home until we were done filming. And we filmed in April of 2023.
Wow, well, that's incredible. I was born and raised in Cleveland. I went to St. Ignatius High School and Case Western Reserve for my undergraduate work before I went to Harvard. And so I know Cleveland pretty well.
And I knew you had Cleveland roots. It's very good to be talking to a fellow. And I was raised about 2 hours south of Cleveland, down in Granville, Ohio.
Sure.
Left there in 1988, but I'm an Ohioan at heart. Maybe that's what kept me sane in 30 years in Los Angeles.
Well, I tell you, you made some good movies. This thing with General Flynn, how did you get together with General Flynn? Did he contact you? Did you contact him? What happened?
Yes, I was. He'd been told about me, and he'd met with many filmmakers, from what I've been told. And he was told, you got to meet this guy. Hollywood didn't get the best of him. And the invitation was very no nonsense. It was, I remember it was mid-February. I said, are you available to meet with General Flynn February 18th, 2023? And that was, I think, Monday night. And the next day was the 14th. And I said, absolutely. And then I decided I would drive. So, and it went, we probably sat for 5 hours the first time. The room was full of people. And then after that weekend, I stayed in Florida and we met again. This time it was more intimate and just talked. For me at the start, my brain just wasn't on making a movie, the way kind of like ambitious Hollywood people can get. At that state where I was digesting all information I could find, including many of the work you've put out, just to sit down with a 3-star general who ran one of our largest intelligence agencies, the DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency, and had been a national security advisor. These are the things I always say, and these are the perks of Hollywood, right? You get to meet interesting people, but this one took this was so an opportunity to sit and talk. To me, that was worth the drive, right? That was worth the time. But instantly, something clicked. As far as understanding what's happening in the world, to see the household I grew up in here in Ohio in the 80s, Iran-Contra and what was going on about all those events was dinner table conversation. So although I've been in movies, some of my frustration with kind of the Hollywood atmosphere is most of my close friends sometimes want to avoid a dinner with me if something intense is going on, because I want to get into subjects like this probably for too many hours than most of my close friends want to handle. So sitting down with a national security advisor to me was fascinating.
Well, Chris, if you'll get ready, I want to show some as we get into this. I want to show the trailer. We'll get into the conversation bit, but towards the end, I want to make sure we show the trailer. The film starts out with which I thought was a really creative way to do it. You have the general surfing and talking about the ocean and the challenges of the ocean and the family. You begin to introduce the family as a family that is adventurous, is in touch with nature, is willing to take challenges. I mean, surfing and the way the general does it is pretty aggressive. It's not the safest sport in the world. And
well, he uses in his language, he uses a lot of aquatic metaphors. And when I said when we first sat, I really tried to um, just listen and talk, and I gave a little bit about myself, so I could kind of see who he was, just as if they had their neighbors over for a barbecue, and I was trying to just see who this man is, and I found him incredibly likable, incredibly intelligent, without all the affects of I guess politics or military. He just is a very warm guy, but that water, clearly, growing up on the ocean, Rhode Island, it affected all the family. But he always went for an aquatic metaphor. If I felt like I was drowning, or when you get, he would use surf terms. When you get you get hit by a big wave and you go under, and so I thought, well, instantly, I think probably the first time I said, well, it sounds like we're definitely going to capture some water images. I also thought it was interesting because I didn't know a ton, and so I wasn't expecting a man his age to still be surfing, because I grew up I spent the last 30 years in Venice Beach, California. So the surfers I saw were not quite, they weren't 3-star generals or
Right.
security advisors. So I thought that was interesting, and it's something. Why didn't I know that? Like, why there's a very human side to General Flynn that the corporate media never shows, right?
Right.
They've made an attempt to dehumanize him. I wanted to make a big effort to remind people of all political persuasions that this is a human and his family. They're a human family, and if you're going to even start to understand, you have to reverse what they've done, which is to portray. They do it to many people, and you probably know the list of people where I can sense it's an orchestrated effort to dehumanize someone, because
Right.
once you've done that, the public, it's much easier to manipulate the narrative.
That's right. And they do it to all of us that they disagree with.
Mm-hmm.
And but I thought I especially did like the family part of it, because you brought in his wife, was his high school sweetheart, really, that he married young, and she seems like a very strong woman and a very strong part of his life, and they seem very together as a team. And his son, who you also introduced into the movie and was part of the story, not only because he was doing public relations for the general, but he became part of the Mueller investigation. We'll cover that in a minute. But I really appreciated knowing more about his family. I had not seen his wife. I didn't really know that part of his life at all. And it really illuminated a depth to the general. I mean, first of all, General Flynn just looks like a general. I mean, his physical looks, this is a guy who, if you're casting, this is the guy you would cast to be a 3-star general. And in fact, he is. He looks the part. And the demeanor is such that it's military. But yet he's very human in terms of his interests. He's very, caring about people. You do a good deal on introducing it with his background, and he's been a warrior and highly regarded in intelligence. You want to talk that you showed scenes from Afghanistan. You showed the different parts of his warrior activities going back to when he was very young, which I thought was fascinating. Want to comment on that, Scott?
Absolutely. And, by design, I thought the movie should begin, with a quick intro, but then you get into the war, because first and foremost, he's a soldier, all right, which people need to know. He has spent a lot of time in active combat, and he has seen death. He has seen the atrocities of war, and in extended conversations that forms many of his opinions. By no means is he anti. The terms, right? The language, the terms are tricky. He's of course he's not a pacifist, but he is someone that knows that when we make decisions about war and the potential loss of life, it has to be done with extreme care and thought, and that hit me. And now, for most of my adult life, I was a California Democrat, right? So, and this wasn't about politics to me. It had nothing to me. This was I was trying to get the film to transcend that, but I thought the war element is something everybody should know. I also found that it unifies people, and that was a goal of the film, which is this is not about the crossfire of two different sides. The audience has had, let's say that any audience has probably consumed 2,000 hours of the corporate media's vision of General Flynn. This movie, I tell people, well, now you've got 2 hours, and this is coming from him and his family and other members in the media and the military and intelligence services. And you can digest it and balance it all out for yourself. But it was important for me that they can tell their story. And all we did was follow the truth, because even the crew, most of my crew, I didn't change the crew to do a film with General Flynn. I brought in my Hollywood crew.
The thing that impressed me, and there's a lot of signals the general gives off. I mean, for instance, he was very clear about saying that war is a very serious matter, and we shouldn't go to war except for a compelling reason. And then he gave off a number of signals. General Smedley Butler, who, in the 1930s wrote a book called War is a Racket, and talked about how all we're doing is fighting wars for the arms dealers and these perpetual wars that the deep state runs. Well, General Flynn comments about war being a racket. He comments about the arms dealers. He comments about perpetual war. So for a warrior, he understands that many of the battles we get into, that there is a deep state here.
This is the best of Dr. Jerome Corsi on the Truth Central.
So therefore, the government lying to get us into a war, he's an intelligence officer. He's aware that these manipulations go on, and he's aware of it in a very deep way. I mean, that came through to me from just the little signals he gave off that were indicative that he's been there. He's seen it. He's been on battlefields and said, why are we doing this?
Yes. Is when he said it live, I mean, we did 100 hours of interviews, but I remember a nugget where he said, and this is in the start of the film, if we're going to war, it means we've failed.
Yes.
War is a failure of leadership. It is a failure of diplomacy. It is a failure of policy. And I went, because it's always trying to break the cliche, right? If someone is a 3-star general, the media, if they want to character assassinate him, and they do, they're going to paint him as a war hawk, or they're going to paint him as, make the public fear this person because it's something out of a Stanley Kubrick movie, right? It's the general that wants nothing but war. So I thought instantly that was important for the audience to see, because it's not just one line. It was a theme about throughout, you prepare for war, but you hope for peace, right? And so there's just a complexity to a very rational, compassionate man who understands war. And I thought that was important for all audience, because the other goal was we weren't making a film to preach to the choir, right? My desire after talking with the general was that we would make something that all of us can share with our friends who might not see it yet, or they might be resistant to it because maybe they're left of center, maybe they've been, but I wanted something where on that war front, and I remember remember when Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders were campaigning in 2016, they had crowds of 10, 20, 30,000, and the main message was end the endless wars. And then Jeb Bush and Hillary Clinton, a part of what I call the war machine, right? They had crowds of at least dozens, if not hundreds of people. So I saw that one thing that unites citizens of a country is this subject of war. And someone like General Flynn should be in a position of power, because I say this about anyone who understands, who's been there in these wars, when decisions are being made, someone who actually knows what the reality is should be involved in those decisions.
I think that's a very important point. Also, it's like some of the complexities of his life and involvement. The Obama part, I thought you did particularly well. So here's the general, and he's now beginning to write reports, and he's beginning to say our intelligence is deficient. We're not doing a good job on intelligence. We're not accurately understanding the world situation. We're making political decisions that may be inappropriate. And he begins to get vocal about this. Now, all of a sudden, Obama pays attention to him and brings him back to Washington. And you make the point of you want to have your enemies closer. In other words, they want to bring the general out of the field where they can get him in Washington, where they can control him and rein him in and make him follow the rules. Now, I thought that was an interesting perception. You want to comment on that?
Yeah, and it's still, like many things in life, it's still an open question. Bob Gates was involved in that too. I believe, just from reading through Bob Gates after General Flynn wrote Fixing Intel, which kind of goes after my assessment of it, goes after your standard CIA method of intelligence, which is whatever you get, it goes to the top, and then the top decides where it goes, right? So it allows an organization to become a captured organization, captured outfit very quickly, because all you got to do is capture the top. So my assessment of Fixing Intel was to decentralize intelligence so it can be shared across the lower ranks, and it can't be controlled by the top. So that was instantly, one could argue, a threat to the way things have been done.
Right.
So that caused, it sounded like when Fixing Intel, he wrote that, he put it out towards the end of 2009, that could have ended his career. And there's some stories of, people, but it was, I believe, Bob Gates, Secretary of Defense, who said, this is genius. This is smart. And then Jim Clapper and others in the Obama administration. And Bob Gates had been Secretary of Defense that spanned over Bush into Obama. So maybe he was a reasonable person. But I think it's an interesting fact, right, that it was Secretary of Defense who said, no, this is great. And then when the decision was made, was this because, this man who's been in the heart of the highest levels of intelligence in Iraq and Afghanistan really knows what we really want to bring an intelligent person into the Obama administration? Or is it a case of keep your friends close, but your enemies closer?
Yeah, I mean, Obama promoted General Flynn to be head of the Defense Intelligence Agency. So he gave him a very powerful position,
right?
Which you would assume he did because he trusted him. Okay, now that's and the idea that he was put there so he could be controlled by Brennan at the CIA, by Clapper, and these other intelligence officers around him who were, in fact, Obama loyalists, in that they had deep state attitudes. They didn't mind lying to defeat Donald Trump. They had an agenda that was a globalist agenda. They were not necessarily interested in the U.S. interests per se. They were inclined to fight perpetual wars. I mean, Obama was radicalizing everything since the first day he got into office. He was radicalizing race, saying that this professor story about losing his keys and trying to get into his home in Cambridge, and was arrested by a Cambridge policeman, that was racial bias, and all the things that Obama did to radicalize everything. And now Flynn comes in, he starts in the defense intelligence, begins doing his job the way he wants to, and he's got an assessment before Congress that doesn't agree with where Brennan and Clapper have decided that they want to control the narrative. And Flynn's out there saying, no, it isn't that way at all. I don't agree. Now, that's not supposed to happen in Washington politics. They're all supposed to be on the same narrative. And here's Flynn telling the truth. You're not supposed to tell the truth in Washington. You're supposed to stay with the narrative, the established line. And so Flynn immediately starts targeting himself. And I think you did a good job of illustrating that, Scott. I can remember the one scene where they're all coming in front of Congress and testifying, and Flynn's out there giving his own report. What a comment on that part of the movie. I thought it was particularly good.
I mean, in front of Congress with
Yes.
Yes. Well, so Jim Clapper, Jim Comey, John Brennan, General Flynn are going in front of Congress. I think it was the state of ISIS was the topic.
Yes, it was about ISIS.
And everyone was basically saying, "Oh, it stems with the narrative was the JV team, no worries, right?" And they all went through. We got them under control. We got them under control. And the report, and this isn't just General Flynn sitting up there giving his opinion. At that time, he had 20,000 employees under him at the Defense Intelligence Agency. This was their report. And the night before, he'd been given a redlined version of his report. And he said, "No, this is wrong. Like, I've got to tell the people the truth." And so this is where you see he's incorruptible. And they may have banked on the fact that once someone comes into Washington and you wine and dine them and you give them, interesting story. Someone who worked at the DIA I met completely separate told me a story about they called security to move like a certain car out of the director's space, not realizing that it was General Flynn's car because he didn't show up with this new big job in some fancy car, and they figured, oh, the director of this agency, this must not be his car. And they said it in a way like we realized right off the bat he was a man of the people.
Yeah, well, this is the Washington game. They take you in and they make you feel special, and then you get to the fancy restaurants and you have to move your family, and they find you a place and they pay for your move, and everything is comfortable.
And he's incorruptible.
And they expect you to say, well, I don't want to lose this, so I better play the game. I better go along. I better understand that this has already been decided, and I don't want to buck this because do I really want to go back to Kansas? Am I going to be thrown out of here? And then we're going to have to move ourselves, and it's going to disrupt the family. So they're banking on you being corruptible. And Flynn was not. He wouldn't. The red line means they crossed out the part of General Flynn's prepared remarks that they didn't want him to read, and they gave him the parts that they wanted him to read. They made it their narrative, and he refused to do that. Now, at that particular time, what was going on is you had John Kerry and McCain coming before Congress and saying, we have to work with the moderate terrorists, the moderate rebels, and they were actually involved in creating ISIS. Obama helped create ISIS through Kerry and Flynn. I solidly believe that. And Baghdadi, of course, then turned against them, and they had meetings with all of these, the core group that was the ISIS originally. And so their idea was we could support the moderate terrorists to combat against the extreme terrorists. But I always thought that Obama and they were all going to make money on the terrorist war continuing with the disruption, which Obama liked because it was destabilizing, and that's part of the communist agenda to destabilize America. And I've always believed Obama was trained in communism from Frank Marshall Davis, was himself anti-American. Fundamental change to America. Well, thank you very much. We're seeing what that means today with the woke and the rest of it. But the point is that Flynn wasn't buying it. He was saying ISIS is a terrorist group. We got to take them seriously. They're going to do damage. And Flynn was right.
Mm-hmm.
Now, suddenly, Obama turns on Flynn. Okay, so Flynn loses his job as DEI, heading the Defense Intelligence Agency. And he's in retirement now for a while. Okay, so this for military is a big disgrace. But Flynn didn't seem to mind it too much. He took it, and then the next part of the movie that really caught my attention, I thought you did a very good job with all of this, was that when Trump is coming on, the one person that Obama in their private conversation, president outgoing, the president incoming, That's a very important conversation. And Obama says, don't hire Flynn. Now, I've always thought he didn't want him hiring Flynn because Flynn knew too much about Obama. And if Flynn was national security advisor, he would go after Obama, and he would go after all the things Obama did with Iran and supporting Iran. He'd go after all the deals that were made behind the table. So what do you think about that? And I've written articles on this. I've talked to the general about it. I think the general agrees that had he been remaining as national security advisor for Trump, we'd be living in a different world today. Yes. Scott?
That so much right there. I was once told about, someone in the intelligence world, these globalists are flat thinkers. Maybe it's true, because when I think about, Obama, the other thing, Obama never met General Flynn, which is mind blowing, right? Maybe it's unprecedented that a sitting president does not meet the man that he's putting in charge of one of the largest intelligence agencies. That's in the movie in more detail. But so even if you're thinking and you've done some research on candidate Donald Trump, and you want to make sure he doesn't hire General Flynn, wouldn't the logical thing say this, either don't mention him or say this is the guy you really want?
Yeah, right.
So a lot of it, I constantly think these things through, right?
Yeah. Well, you're right. I mean, that probably if Obama doesn't want me hiring Flynn, maybe I ought to do it.
Right. I've watched people try to sabotage friendships use much more complex psychology than this.
Yeah.
So,
and I think you make the point that's really when Flynn and Trump started getting together. Is that it's this whole Obama opposition made Flynn more interesting to Trump.
Well, General Flynn had, for your audience, he as soon as he retired from the military, and it was basically because of that event within the Obama administration. So he was when he retired, and he instantly went into doing things, and I got being active. And he's just that kind of guy. I kind of described him the other day as the movie Cool Hand Luke. There's a fight scene between George Kennedy and Paul Newman, and it's a classic, depiction of David and Goliath. And David just does not stop. But so the general continued on, and he was willing to advise any presidential candidate. And he said, I would have advised Bernie Sanders if he'd called, and I would have advised, but he ended up advising about 5 presidential candidates, one of them being Donald Trump, and then spent a lot of time on the campaign trail with Donald Trump. So by the time Obama gave him Donald Trump that advice, don't hire Kim Jong-un of North Korea or General Flynn,
right.
Donald Trump had already come to know General Flynn very well. So then it was a quick phone call.
Right.
It's covered in the movie.
And also, Trump also made overtures towards Kim Jong-un. So he took what Obama said to him and said, if Obama doesn't want me to do these things, maybe it's what I should do. I mean,
right.
Trump immediately said, if Obama doesn't like it, then maybe I should like it. And I thought,
Devin Nunes says in the movie, is you can't make this stuff up.
Yeah, you can't make it up. I mean, and so then we come to the part of the movie where he's covering the setup. The Department of Justice decides they're going to come over and see Flynn, and they're going to trap him. Coming over, actually, we're just here, General, to talk with you. This is not official. And of course, as soon as the FBI says that to you, you want to get a lawyer. And you should not talk to the FBI without a lawyer. I said, when they knocked on my door for the Mueller investigation, I said, thank you very much, gentlemen, for being here. Well, first we had German Shepherds at that time, and German Shepherds could taste FBI, so we had to get them secured before we opened the door, or we'd have dead German Shepherds pretty quick. And then we talked to them and said, look, I said, well, I'm going to get my attorney right away. And who do we contact? But I don't have anything to say right now. So they went away. But the point is that they entrapped him. And they talked about this Russian call and talking about sanctions. I mean, it's a complicated story. But they set Flynn up intentionally. They went over there to entrap him. And so the FBI was already working against Donald Trump, which was the beginning of the Russian collusion idea, which Hillary had started surfacing when the emails were stolen and were published in 2016 campaign by Julian Assange, who's just been released from prison, thank God. But the point is that this Russian collusion story was now beginning to build to try to destroy Trump's first term in office. I do say first term in office. I think he'll have a second. But the point is that Flynn played a major role in this.
Mm-hmm.
And Flynn is not only under indictment, but they say to him, if you don't take a plea deal, we're going to indict your son on a foreign agent's violation because he had been working with Turkey and they didn't register as Turkey agents. All of this is nonsense. But they went after Flynn's son to get him to take a plea deal, which would admit culpability on Flynn's part. And Flynn took the deal to protect his son. Now, that's kind of like falling on a hand grenade to protect the troops.
That's right. Well, when there's many elements here in this plea deal, but the number one thing, he took the plea deal to protect his son. And 97 or 98% of Americans who are up against the United States government take a plea deal. So that's the other thing I found in the orchestrated narrative by the mainstream media was, he took a plea deal. But anybody who watches a cop show, anybody who watches NYPD Blue, any episode of Law and Order, you always know, especially someone who can't necessarily afford legal fees, and you have to be a billionaire to afford legal fees up against the United States government, they take a plea deal. But the added element that everyone should understand is that they had an off-the-books deal, and this is presented in the movie by one of the attorneys on his team, that they would not go after his son if he took the plea deal. Now, why that was important to me as a storyteller, as a movie maker, is because there's that balance of there's logic, but then there's also heart and soul, right? And I thought, we're not just telling a movie of the events, the geopolitical events, or the court case. We're telling a universal story about family. And at first I said an American family. And the more I hear from people, I said, no, it transcends even our borders. It's the story of a family, because I figure it still needs to be a story that everyone can relate to. So when as you mentioned, we tie in Lori Flynn, his wife, his high school sweetheart, and his son. But one of the blocks I think a lot of people have in understanding what's happening is their inability to accept how evil some of these organizations are that we're up against. And when you see the inhumanity, they didn't just attempt to destroy General Flynn with no compassion. They went blindly after any member of his family or anyone who offered him support. Now, as a storyteller, I'm just like, that's something everyone needs to know, because this transcends politics. This really comes down to, do you have a human heart or not?
Yeah, well, they tried to do the same thing to me. I'm not a billionaire, and they offered me a plea deal. They said they were going to put me in front of a jury. They thought I had a tie to Assange, which I didn't have, and they say, we're going to put you in front of a jury, and they'll convict you. You'll spend the rest of your life in prison. And I figured that was going to happen. Or you can take the plea deal. Well, I refused the plea deal. I couldn't face lying before a judge and a God to keep myself out of prison. I said, well, you better just get ready to put me in prison. They did not indict me. But that was a miserable time in my life, and it, I think, probably wrecked my 32-year marriage. My wife wanted me to get out of politics, and I did for a while to comply with her wishes. And then she had an affair and decided to break the marriage. I planned to live the rest of my life with her. At any rate, God, I think, took her out of my life. I went back to work, been back at it now. And I think this is what the prices you pay here are enormous. So I could relate to that part of the movie very personally, because I've been through it. I knew what General Flynn went through and what the whole family went through. That decision is not an easy decision to make. Now, General Flynn ultimately got Sidney Powell involved, and he was able to reverse this after the Russian collusion story began falling apart.
This is the best of Dr. Jerome Corsi on the Truth Central.
Wouldn't take their plea deal. If I'd taken their plea deal, they would have said, see, Corsi had a tie to Assange. That's how Roger Stone knew, and that's how Trump knew, and that's how they coordinated the release of these emails with the Russian had stolen. Well, because I did not have a tie with Assange, and they couldn't find one because it didn't exist. Their case ended, and they had to close down the investigation, which they did shortly after I refused the plea deal. And yet, because General Flynn took the plea deal, his legal case continues, and now he's got to fight that the plea deal was on fraudulent terms, including back deals that the attorneys made with each other to get him to take that deal, including the attorneys representing him, which basically sold him out. Said, you should take this deal. That's why I didn't want to hire Washington attorneys, because they all work together. They all work with the government. They'll make deals and sell you out because they're more interested in their relationships with the government. The governments are planning, these Department of Justice people are planning, if they're lawyers, to retire into these law firms with cushy jobs at the end of their careers. It's a very tight little family there, and they will sell you out. Now, I thought it took the general and Sidney Powell great courage fighting, again, the federal establishment, federal judicial establishment, with a judge that did not want to give him favor, and he won. And again, you tell that story very effectively, bringing Sidney Powell into the movie. And I thought, again, one of the strengths of the movie, the way you did the story, and I greatly admire it, was it is a story about General Flynn, a human being and a warrior, but a complicated warrior and a hero of America, maybe one of our best generals ever. Scott, do you want to comment on that?
I agree. So much to say, right? Where he, and this is what everyone who came in to Florida and met him, they were struck by his vast knowledge. Well, they say, Flynn knows where the bodies are buried, right? You add that, his knowledge of how the system works, with the fact that he's incorruptible. And you can just even see in the movie, he now is aligned with the Republican Party in the sense that he supports Donald Trump, and he is a great pick for anyone with conservative values. However, he doesn't pause to go after Mike Pence, right? Or Rance Priebus.
Yes.
Or what we call rhinos, right? Many terms. But the fact that he is none of that matters to him. It is he's guided by the truth. So if a fake Republican or a rhino, whatever you want to call them, someone not on board with the interests of the people of this country and the constitutional republic, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what their party is. And that is what the American people have been craving in politics, which is someone who just calls it as it is. And that comes through. That comes through anytime someone has the chance to spend an hour, if not weeks, with him.
Well, I thought that part of the film where you're talking about Mike Pence and Reince Priebus was very effective. And again, the general comes out as a man of God, a man of principles, a warrior, but in defense of America with a very, very sensitive understanding of the evil that has become much of our government, and fighting these dark forces, which are globalist, deep state, not loyal to the Constitution, not loyal to the United States, post-American. We used to carry around the book, post-America. Well, I'm not interested in post-America. I'm interested in advancing America and the Constitution and God and the principles we have. And so General Flynn is a true hero to me. And I want to show a little bit of the trailer, and then we'll conclude the conversation. But Scott, I think you've done a magnificent film here, and I want everybody to see it. So, Chris, if you just go to the trailer, we'll just play the trailer, and people get a sense of what this movie's about. Go ahead, Chris.
Considered highly skilled when it comes to intelligence gathering.
33 years in the U.S. Army. Flynn knew exactly how the system worked. He knew exactly what the intel world had been up to. He understood its funding. They had to get rid of Flynn.
The president's former national security advisor, Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, pleading guilty today to lying to the FBI.
There was a moment where I just felt like I was drowning.
ISIS as the JV team. Do you feel as though your warnings were ignored?
We all knew that he was one of the most respected generals in the military, plain and simple.
Well, in 2012, he was appointed director of Defense Intelligence Agency. He ordered the first audit of the use of DIA's use of contractors. This set off alarm bells.
So I'm in there with these other political appointees. They're all supposed to go in there and tell what they believe to be the truth. What they did was they took my assessment and they wanted me to change it. And I was like, I'm not changing it.
Mike Flynn, whatever you think of him or his politics, did not lie, but instead told the truth. And so he was, by definition, the most dangerous possible person for Donald Trump to hire.
President Obama said, but I do have one specific recommendation. Stay away from Michael Flynn. He's bad news.
I went into the service because I love our country. And I come home and I find out that the worst enemy that I'm going to face in my life is right here in America.
Even had he not served this country, even if he were not a combat veteran, to turn something like this loose on a family, I mean, it's monstrous.
The media was out there in droves.
I went into a very deep depression, like suicidal depression. The only thing that kept me alive was my son.
We always knew that we somehow had to get through it because we knew he wasn't guilty.
Over time, instead of being pounded down below the surface of the ocean, we started to fight. I'm now above the surface. But I can see the shoreline. And I started to swim.
Well, it's a magnificent movie, and I encourage everybody to watch it. You'll be cheating yourself if you don't watch this film. This is the true story of General Flynn. I think, Scott, you've done a magnificent job of pulling it together and telling the story the way it is. I applaud you.
Thank you, Dr. Corsi.
And Chris, we show again where people can get the film. I want to make sure everybody knows how to get the film. First of all, General Flynn has his website. There's a General Flynn, the movie website. You can find it easily. And the trailer's on it. There's different ways to buy this. You can get it streaming for Amazon Prime has it streaming, YouTube TV, iTunes, which is Apple TV, Google Play, and you can buy the DVD at Amazon, at Walmart, Target, Salem Now. There's different places to get it. Also directly from the Flynn website. It's just over a little bit over 2 hours, and I'll tell you, it will pass you won't miss a minute of this. You'll be glued to it, and it's excellent storytelling. Scott, your cinematographic skills are excellent, but the story is what really drives this. It's such a powerful story, and you do talk about deliver the truth, whatever the cost. And Mike Flynn has certainly paid a huge price to serve this country, and it would have broken most people what he had to go through. And it's a testament to the evil, but it's also a testament to the end. God always wins, and the truth wins. And I'd like to thank you for doing this, and I look forward to many more from you, Scott. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
All right, thank you all for watching. This is Dr. Jerome Corsi. It's the Truth Central. We've been interviewing Scott Wiper, who has produced, directed this magnificent DVD, which is Flynn the Movie.